excited to have the conversation on the perspective of on the perspective of Washington, because it's been a
Yes.
hell of a week here in South Africa, and I'd like to take a break from all of the politicking that's
Well,
happening here.
we will refer to South Africa, but I got to warn anybody who loves the burning platform this morning that because we've got David in Washington joining us, and it's really nice of him to do this because it's very late at night in DC. So he said he's a night owl anyway, so he doesn't mind joining us. But I'm thrilled that he is able to make it. Therefore, much of the focus for the burning platform today is likely to be on U.S. domestic affairs, and especially because there's a brand new president. There is a brand new administration in place, and we need to talk about so much of the stuff that is going on in American politics. It's been an incredibly fractious start to the year, and Joe Biden's trying to find his feet now, even though he's no stranger to the West Wing. He probably knows it better than anyone else in the U.S. political system who's alive at the moment. And we will find out from David what his insights are. So David Smith, for those who don't know, is the bureau chief there in Washington. He's based in the epicenter of U.S. politics, and he's also been in South Africa. He's been Washington correspondent since October of 2015, but he's traveled to naval bases in Guantanamo Bay. He's reported from the State Department, from the White House. He was previously Africa correspondent, and he was based here in Johannesburg, where he wrote about the 2010 Football World Cup, the death of Nelson Mandela, the murder trial of Oscar Pistorius, among other things, and he's been all over the world. So David is no slacker when it comes to his experience of the world. David, it's nice to have you on. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Extremely well. David, we got so much to talk to you about. You may not have met Pumi before, but this is your introduction to her, and I've introduced you to everybody else. We're ready to get cracking. First of all, how's Washington at the moment? Is it a pleasant place to be right now? I mean, we've had insurrections. We've had a very cold winter. Are you managing?
Yes, surviving, thank you. It's a little chilly, but there's been a shift in the mood, I think, since the departure of Donald Trump, particularly once he was kicked off Twitter. That really lowered the temperature, and things felt a bit more calm and serene. And, just 2 weeks after that extraordinary riot at the US Capitol, you had a much more pleasant scene there with Joe Biden's inauguration that I was lucky enough to attend. And since then, really a feeling of somewhat return to normality, but obviously only in the political sense, in that Washington is heavily restricted due to the coronavirus. Many restaurants and museums and other things are closed. So people are still tiptoeing around wearing masks and waiting for an end to the pandemic.
Well, Joe Biden has certainly started his administration in an anything but normal way, and we'll look at some of the things he's been doing. Among other things, 37 executive orders within a week of being president. And a lot of people have comments on that, and I'd like to hear yours. But I'm going to let Pumi have the floor first, because she has a bunch of questions for you, and she's also relieved to not have to talk about the Zondo Commission right at the start of the Burning Platform this morning. So, Pum, the floor is yours with David.
David, you talk about lowering the temperature now, that's and the shift in the mood. I'm particularly interested also because Joe Biden came on and he said, politics doesn't have to be shouting all the time. Has that permeated? Has that, just across this perspective in news media, especially? Because there was a time when the news media was also very polarized, not because of Donald Trump's, not least because of Donald Trump's stirring.
Yeah, it was constant anxiety everywhere.
Yes, it's been 4 years of just a blitz of being on edge, of people waking up with dread, with anxiety in the pit of their stomach, fearful that this man has access to the nuclear codes, wondering who he's going to insult, what's he going to do next. So I think the answer to your question is yes and no. Yes, I think a weight has been lifted off lots of people's shoulders. And already there are signs that the Joe Biden presidency might actually be quite boring. And I've heard people say these press briefings, they're boring again. There's a sort of normality to that. There is actually that possibility of waking up and thinking about something other than politics and the White House and actually going about everyday life, such as it is in the pandemic, not being on edge. However, on the other hand, I shouldn't overstate all of that, because Joe Biden didn't come in with a magic wand to fix everything. I mean, for a start, there's the argument that actually normal is what got us here, and the veneer of normality is what actually led to Donald Trump in the first place. But also in the shorter term, right now, you just had 45 Senate Republicans trying to dismiss Trump's impeachment trial, still very, very loyal to the president. You certainly still have right-wing media already attacking Biden daily, saying that he's putting people out of work, that he's trying to silence conservatives. And just for example, at the state level, you have Republican parties becoming more and more extreme and descending, sadly, into white supremacy in some cases, and just bonkers conspiracy theories. So the country does remain bitterly divided and polarized, and those problems are not going to go away instantly, and it's going to take more than Joe Biden alone to fix it.
But David, how much of this is the creation of the media? I mean, you talk about a lot of the decorative elements of politics and this fact that Joe Biden is perceived now to be this boring guy who's just going to go back to normal. The problem here is that, in my mind, it's the media who's been making people anxious. I mean, the whole argument that Donald Trump was this unstable guy who held the nuclear codes and was a threat, an existential threat to our lives, like climate changes and all the other stuff. In reality, his policy was probably a lot more normal, but the hype around Donald Trump, and much of it caused by his own nonstop tweeting, how much of it was actually a big existential threat? He didn't start any wars. He wasn't irresponsible with the nuclear football. We've got Joe Biden running around at the moment, signing 37 executive orders into play within the first week. I think Trump signed 3 in his first week. I think Obama signed 1 or just over 4 if you take the maximum that they're reporting. So how is it that the big story is still Donald Trump's impeachment when there's 37 executive orders, and among them are some of the things that are worth discussing? So if this is boring, forgive me, but I think it's kind of important that Joe Biden is doing things like killing the Keystone Pipeline, which seems to have affected more than 40,000 direct and associated jobs. If that's boring, I think those 40,000 people might disagree. The idea that there are a lot of cosmetic things going on that actually aren't so cosmetic. I mean, the UN nominee, Biden's nominee for the UN, has just said that the Uyghur persecution in China is not genocide, when I think it's clear to anyone who takes an interest in China that it is. Where John Kerry has been mouthing off about climate change, but is one of the richest people in America with a private jet. If it's such a big threat, how can he still have a private jet and speak with forked tongue about things like climate change? These aren't boring things. These are actually very practical and policy discussions that are not being had because Joe Biden's here, everything's safe now, you can all sleep easy at night, Orange Man has left the stage, and hopefully the world will suddenly transform into something better. That's a childish notion of how things work.
Yeah, there was a great column in the New York Times that did run through some of the alarmism around Trump 4 years ago that never came to pass. As you say, people feared this man's going to start nuclear war. It never happened. In fact, many would argue Trump was the first president since Jimmy Carter not to start a war and to actually bring troops home. And his foreign policy record in the end was probably pretty mixed. Some would say terrible in terms of Russia, North Korea, and so on, but better in other areas and some Middle East peace deals. And it was always an interesting question to look at what Trump did and say, well, maybe would another Republican president have done this? And maybe we are getting too het up over the tweets when actually look what he does, not what he says. And actually some of it was within Republican Party orthodoxy, sort of tax cuts and so on. On the other hand, I wouldn't follow that argument all the time, in the sense that very early on, one of his executive actions was to ban immigration from 7 Muslim majority countries. He also constructed 450 miles of border wall on the US-Mexico border. Among the most egregious examples was a zero tolerance immigration policy, which saw children separated from their parents at the border.
That started under Obama. We were told that story about the cages, and it was something which was already taking place under the Obama administration, an administration that Joe Biden was a part of. But
I think some of those cages were constructed then, but the actual the idea of separating children from their parents was very much Trump. But yes, I agree with you to the extent that there are serious policy discussions to be had now. I think Biden will have a short honeymoon where people are relieved and they say, Bob the madness is over. But then it will be back to policy deserves scrutiny and Washington is worthy of criticism as much as the others. Yeah,
you're in the Washington press corps, so you have a unique take on things which the rest of us probably would love to have, because it must be very exciting. I mean, you get access to really, really interesting people on the global stage, and you get to be a part of what's actually happening that's quite historic here. But it must bother you as a member of the media that Joe Biden, since he's become president, has answered only one direct question from the press, and he answered that question by snapping at the journalist. We were sold a bill of goods about Donald Trump by the press, that this man was the worst thing for the Fourth Estate since the kings, the tyrants of old, that the Fourth Estate was absolutely under threat from this guy because he was tweeting and because he didn't answer questions. He was hostile to the media. Joe Biden's answered one question. That must bother you as much as it bothers me. And it must bother you even more that the only way he answered that question was to snap at the journalist.
It's actually not true. Yesterday, Biden took several questions from the media over a number of minutes. And it was only right at the end that I think there was that snap that you refer to on one of them. And maybe that clip went viral. But actually, he did do a Q&A with reporters, which was an encouraging sign. And this is going to be one of the very interesting tests, I think, of how Trump remolded the presidency, because even his critics would have to concede he was extraordinarily accessible. I mean, even I, as a foreign press reporter, got into the Oval Office a few times, got to question Trump on numerous occasions there and in the briefing room and when he was about to board his helicopter. In addition, of course, Trump's use of Twitter was, on the one hand, crazy and full of insults, but on another, did give you this incredible window onto the mind of the president, whereas Joe Biden's Twitter feed is much more conventional again. So it will be fascinating to see if Biden just tries to revert to the old style or whether he does make himself available to journalists. And if he doesn't, I'm sure you'll hear a lot about it. He's only 1 week in, so it's a little early to judge. I was encouraged that he did have a bit of a Q&A with reporters so far. We'll have to see if that continues. Certainly his press secretary is now holding daily briefings and wheeling out various experts. That's better than the Trump administration, who at one point went an entire year without a press briefing. But certainly, the way the presidency communicates with the press and the public may never be the same again.
Well, what Gareth alludes to is exactly what a legacy of Trump is, that the media has become so polarized that people had to take sides for whatever reason. And so what comes out is based on the point of view of whoever is putting it out there. And then with algorithms, we only get confirmation bias. You only see the stuff that's linked to the stuff that you have searched for, that you have liked. Do you see any of that changing over you said the press secretary is holding daily briefings now. Do you see any of that changing? Do you think that the media is going to regain its credibility and kind of give us a more tempered and a more objective point of view?
I think it's always very hard to generalize about the media. In fact, I remember being in South Africa and the head of FIFA in the build-up to the 2010 World Cup calling me on a field in front of thousands of South African football fans to try and defend the British media and its coverage of South Africa. But one of my answers there, and one of my answers always would be, the media is obviously such a big, diverse entity. It's very hard to apply one rule to all. So certainly in America right now, there is no escaping certain factions of the media that are incredibly biased. And I'm not sure there's an equivalence between the left wing and the right wing. Certainly on the right, there have been outlets just pushing Trump's false claims of election fraud and his conspiracy theories, and they continue to be very selective in their coverage of Biden. And sure, on the left, there are some outlets that definitely put a spin on it, and it's going to be interesting to see. Do they just become cheerleaders for Biden, or do they become critical as well? There's a whole swathe of other media as well, and I'd say particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, newspapers like the New York Times, Washington Post, and others have actually done a pretty good job and remain relatively impartial. Although, of course, there are critics who disagree with that.
I don't know. I mean, I think that the sycophancy has been ratcheted up to insane levels in some places. I see Biden's tweets about chocolate chip ice cream are being regaled as some kind of return to normalcy, and this is fantastic. And isn't it great that we've got this very, very old man who obviously has got some problems retaining all his cogency all the time. I'm not saying he's completely deranged, but he's certainly got some difficulties, as anyone at that age might have. And while Trump was many, many things, and many of those things are distasteful to both me and you and probably any other sensible person in the world, including all the QAnon nonsense and all of that stolen election stuff, which has been widely discredited now. He had an energy to him, and he was prepared, as you said, to take any comers on issues of both policy and his personality. More or less, the latter dominated more than the former. But I think that Joe Biden here is doing things that just don't seem to resonate with what he's promised. I mean, he said very clearly in exact words, "I will not ban fracking," and then went ahead in his first week of presidency and banned fracking. These are things which are just direct untruths and lies, which the media seem to gloss over, particularly the mainstream and left of center media, who dominate the environment at this stage. And let's be fair, Pumi is not referring to something which is not an established opinion among pretty much all Americans at the moment, that the media is just not to be trusted. Very few people. Trust is at an all-time low, David, and this must make your job very difficult.
Yes, trust is at an all-time low. I just noticed that again in a survey, and it's going to be difficult for the media to climb back from that. For me, particularly, I sometimes I get lucky, I think, because of my sort of outsider status and my British accent. So when I attended Donald Trump's campaign rallies, which are incredible sort of performance art in themselves, and not necessarily in a good way, there would be sort of mobs of people chanting fake news and enemy of the people, and I would go up to them with my notebook and pen, and once they heard my accent, they were sort of very happy to chat, as if somehow I was sort of outside what they were criticizing. But I think Biden has got a honeymoon. Biden has the tremendous advantage of a low bar being set. I mean, expectations, certainly among liberals, among everyone except Trump supporters, were, if you can come out and utter 3 sentences and not tell a lie, and this is a major victory after 4 years of Trump, that honeymoon will wear off, and give it a few more days, a few more weeks. We'll see our first major controversy. We'll see Biden having his feet held to the fire over some promise he made that he broke. I think some sort of equilibrium will be restored. I think, of course, when you talk about the media, it's impossible now not to include social media as part of that, which really is reinforcing the echo chambers, is allowing conspiracy theories to spread like wildfire. There's a needs to be a lot of scrutiny over Facebook and Twitter and others' role in democracy. When they do take action, of course, people on the right accuse them of censorship. So that's going to be a real issue among the others in terms of rebuilding media trust, I think.
Well, let's just talk about an article that you wrote. Sorry, Pums. You've just written an article about Biden continuing to unpick Trump's legacy as impeachment trial looms. First of all, let's just talk about how he's unpicking that legacy, what these many executive actions have been, and which ones you think are a good thing and which ones you think are probably just for show.
Well, yes, there was a blitz of executive orders in the first few days. Many of them overturning Trump orders, which of course were overturning Barack Obama's orders. So we're sort of coming full circle. One example, Biden rejoining the Paris climate agreement, which Trump withdrew from. Trump, of course, famously describing climate change as a Chinese hoax and so on. I think this is a good thing. I think the climate is a genuine existential crisis for humanity. I think 4 years were tragically wasted under Trump as he talked about wind turbines killing birds and so on. So that was a good thing. Biden stopped funding for construction of the border wall. Also, as I say, reversed Trump's ban on immigrants from some Muslim majority countries. They explicitly said, this is xenophobia, nativism.
Well, I think Joe Biden just banned us this week as well. We can't come to America, and Americans can't come here. So
I saw that, yeah.
I'm going to call that some kind of ethno ban, if you don't mind, because it affects me directly. I'm a little pissed off about that one, if you don't mind my saying.
Yeah, sure. Coronavirus, of all these tragedies, all these crises, remains sort of number one priority for Biden. But these executive actions can only go so far. He also needs Congress to act, particularly on the virus, and has got a.
Do you think he's going to get his stimulus package?
Do I think what? Sorry.
Do you think he's going to get his stimulus package signed off?
Not as it stands by Republicans. I don't think. I suspect the most likely scenario is that the Democrats will have to use a process known as budget reconciliation, where once they put it through the House and Senate, they can actually pass it with just a simple majority. And of course, they do now control both chambers, although the Senate will have to be a tiebreaker vote by Vice President Kamala Harris. But even though, just today, for example, I listened into a coronavirus task force briefing, and they were emphasizing how urgent this stimulus package is for administering the vaccine and reopening schools and so on.
In fact, wasn't
Republicans are digging in. Republicans are still the party of obstruction. And I think
wasn't this the week with the highest coronavirus infection and death rates in all of the time that we've had this virus? And surely it's a little hypocritical to be saying that the Republicans are being obstructionist when they don't have Congress in terms of the House or the Senate anymore. You just mentioned Kamala Harris has that tiebreaker vote. They don't occupy the White House anymore. How exactly is it possible for them to be obstructionist when none of the tools available to be obstructive are available to them?
Because of the filibuster, which is this sort of archaic rule that basically allows Republicans or allows the minority party in the Senate to block legislation unless 60 people vote for it. And of course, in the old days, 60 was a reasonable number in the 100-member Senate because there was more bipartisan agreement on all sorts of issues. But over the last 10, 20, 30 years, we've seen this growing sorting of the parties, this polarization, more disagreement than ever on issues like abortion and other things. It means now trying to get anything through such an even Senate is very tough. To get 60 votes, you need to peel off around 10, well, in the current circumstances, 10 of the opposition party. It just very rarely happens. And so Biden's more ambitious goals on the climate, on jobs, on taxes, on all sorts of things are still going to run right into that Republican stone wall. He's going to struggle to get the 60 votes he needs.
Are you already earmarking him as a lame duck then?
No, lame duck would be too harsh, but one of the defining questions of this presidency is going to be to what extent can he play the uniter as his theme, as the theme of his inaugural address? Can he fall back on decades in the Senate as someone who reached across the aisle, who worked across with Republicans, who was a healer? And that was his campaign pitch, that he can bring the parties together and bring the country together. To what extent will that work, or to what extent is it actually outdated and hopelessly naive now? Because even in the time since Biden was in the Senate, things have become a lot more entrenched and bitter and polarized. And will he discover that Republicans are just too cynical to go along and will obstruct him at every turn? This is a big battle. Now, you could argue, like Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s, facing the Great Depression, if ever there was a moment when you have to aim high and think big and do something really dramatic, these interlocking crises, this is it. But Republicans are likely to have a say in that.
Speaking of the negative control that the Republicans have, do you think that those three Republican judges that Trump put into the Supreme Court are paying dividends, given the last ruling that about Trump being prosecuted, not being prosecuted for things that happened when he was the president? And before that, it was he couldn't be prosecuted because he's a sitting president. And now he's no longer president. Therefore, is it paying dividends, do you think?
It's early to say yet. I think in the very short term, it did not pay dividends as Trump hoped, with his very crude understanding of the Constitution and the division of powers. I think he genuinely hoped that by appointing 3 conservative Supreme Court justices, when he challenged the result of the election and tried to overturn it, they would actually go along with that. And it came as a nasty surprise when they actually put their belief in the law and their view as judges ahead of partisanship. So, and he tweeted, very disappointed with the Supreme Court and so on. All his dreams there crumbled. But certainly, yes, in the coming years, we may well see challenges to Joe Biden's legislation work their way up through the courts, reach the Supreme Court, and that conservative bulwark will be beneficial for Republicans. That's why they were so delighted Trump did it. That's why, to this day, many people would argue that is Trump's most lasting legacy, a transformation of the judiciary, and not only 3 Supreme Court justices, but nearly 300 other federal court appointments, giving it a real right-wing ideological bent.
What do you make of this is just, some people might say this is fluff, but one of the orders that was signed by Joe Biden has to do with transgender people competing in women's sport, and you mentioned it in your article. I'm not sure how feminists feel about this, but this means that women don't really have a right to compete in their own sport because transgender men can now take part in women's sport, and it's an important thing for Biden. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it in the first week of his presidency. And he's also allowed transgender people back into the military with free gender reassignment surgery at taxpayers' expense. This seems like the kind of ideological point that has been pushed by the left in America, and it's almost like their reward has come through here in Joe Biden, but it doesn't really, this stuff is not important to more than under a single percentage point of the entire population of the United States. And yet, it creates such enormous debate and consternation across the political spectrum. Why do you think he did this?
Well, the transgender ban in the military, particularly, was actually another example of I think Trump's bigotry and narrow-mindedness, and there was an outcry at the time over that, and with Biden moving swiftly to reverse it, backed by his new defense secretary, there was a lot of praise from LGBTQ groups, pointing out that the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, is the biggest employer of transgender people in America. But as all in these cases, it's also setting an example to the rest of the country and the world about tolerance, about inclusivity, about not making these people feel that they're outsiders.
I don't think anyone can have a fundamental disagreement with the fact that those people have all the right to these freedoms and to be equally treated as anyone who is by traditional means male or female. But why should the taxpayer pay for people in the military to get free gender reassignment surgery? I mean, to me, that sounds like a step too far for many people.
Hey, I don't know much about the details of that, but these are people putting their lives on the line, serving their country, taking huge risks for the military. So if anybody is entitled to some taxpayer benefits, you could argue maybe it's them. To answer you, I'd need to look at what other benefits people get.
People join the military voluntarily. They don't join by conscription. So if it's too difficult to put your life on the line, don't. They're not looking for warm bodies. They can find them, I'm sure, if they need to, but they're not looking for them, and they don't need to go through a couple of $100,000 operation first before they can put you into the field. It doesn't sound like a terribly good use of time and money, but we'll leave that for the moment. What do you make of the women's sports situation and the fact that transgender people are now going to compete in women's sport?
Yeah, I haven't looked much into that one either, I must say. I mean, I'm aware certainly there's a controversy there. Clearly, you think that's a bad idea.
Well, I just think Joe Biden said that this was going to be the administration of science. He was going to his admin was going to be led by scientific, reasonable, sensible thought. Now, science seems to infer that there are men and there are women in every kind of species that there is on Earth, and that of course there are these people who are kind of in the gray area in between. But this does huge damage to women's sport, because suddenly, a group of women is going to be competing against someone who has distinct advantages. It's something we've dealt with very carefully in South Africa around the situation of Caster Semenya, and it hasn't completely been resolved here, but it continues to be something which a lot of people consider hugely controversial.
Yes,
I don't actually have a dog in the fight, to be honest.
And what's the latest situation with Caster Semenya, who I remember well? Yeah.
Well, she seems to be competing, and she's certainly been allowed to compete by many of the international bodies. There are still a number of court restrictions. Yeah, there are a number of court cases which I think are still pending. She's not allowed to take certain hormones. She has to take others. It's become so complicated that she can't just, in a straightforward way, compete, which is unfair to her. But there are many women who she competes against who think that it's terribly unfair that she has certain advantages biologically, which they don't. So it's complicated, and I don't expect you to answer that, but it is something that clearly Joe Biden has prioritized in the first week of his presidency.
Well, one of the other things, though, so just speaking of biology and science, that has been, I think, one of Trump's probably abiding failures. It was unable to undo Obamacare. And Joe Biden comes in, and one of his executive orders is really around reinstating the way that the original plan was slated. How are people feeling about that?
Oh, I think every poll, every survey would show a majority of Americans favor Obamacare. I'm sure anecdotally, I know myself people who very rightly grumble about how much it's cost them personally, and there are flaws in the system. But it was Obama's signature legislative achievement, and it's certainly better than what's there before. But it definitely needs improvements too. And Trump promised to kill it off, and never quite succeeded. And memorably, one night in the Senate, John McCain, an old nemesis of Trump, voted against killing it, and somehow Obama survived and staggered on and survived in courts.
Well, in point of fact, Donald Trump did remove the individual mandate, which essentially did kill Obamacare.
I think saying it essentially killed it would be going a bit far. The Affordable Care Act has certainly taken some bashes and bruises, but battles on, and obviously now I think Biden is going to try and move it on. But what's extraordinary about all this is that American healthcare remains broken and bewildering and baffling to a non-citizen like me. In the UK right now, the National Health Service is probably under the biggest strain in its 70-odd year history with coronavirus, but we're very grateful for it. And healthcare is accessible for free because people fund it with taxes. In the US, it's the inequality of the healthcare system is extraordinary. The way rich people can pay for the best care, when millions are left behind, that often breaks down along racial lines. The incredible expense of drugs and other equipment. I'm sure you've heard these infamous stories of the same drug across the border in Canada being about sort of 1/10 of the price. And I myself, I moved directly from South Africa to the US in 2015. I was astonished, pretty much for any treatment or any medicine. Basically, South Africa is about 1/10 of the cost of something in the US for pretty much exactly the same service, exactly the same quality. So, Barack Obama, added however many 100,000 people to health insurance, but there's still a long way to go. There's a need for real root and branch reform there.
Can I ask you about the situation for Joe Biden within his own party? Because a president is only as strong as the support that he can rally within his own immediate environment. And in the Democratic Party at the moment, there are a lot of dissatisfied people on the far left. In fact, on the night of his inauguration, there were protests and screams of unhappiness from people in Portland, Oregon, and other very far left parts of America. He's got a difficult job trying to cobble together the moderates in the Democratic Party, the majority of probably the Senate, who are kind of the old school, tried and tested political establishment. And then on the other hand, he's got, the AOCs and the Ilhan Omars in the House, who are really leading from a point of view of having that edge and being the check and balance on the moderates in their party. How do you think he's going to navigate that? Because we know Bernie Sanders fell in quite early on and was there at the inauguration, famously now as a meme, but he was there at a fairly early stage, and Bernie threw his lot in with Joe Biden, as did many of the other squad members in the House. But how do you think he's going to cope with pressure from the left? Because they're feeling buyer's remorse at the moment, that he's not doing enough. You talk about the right and how unhappy they are with him, but his own left is also very unhappy with him at the moment.
Maybe, although I think there's room for them to get a lot more unhappy. I think many elements of the left are still calling a truce and a ceasefire and keeping their powder dry in early days. But look, it's going to be I think it's going to be tremendously difficult. There's a strong argument to say that America should have 4 political parties rather than 2. Moderate Republicans and then extreme right-wing Republicans on the one hand, and then moderate Democrats like Joe Biden versus more lefty Democrats like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And for whatever reason, these gravitational forces sort of pull them together to be two parties. And Biden is an old school, moderate, middle of the road character, and his overtures to Republicans are not going to play well with the left. I think, as we were talking about with the media as well, he's still in this honeymoon period. People are cutting him some slack. I think there is encouragement on the left that Biden has been more aggressive than previous presidents, talking about racial equity and embedding it in everything they do. And just in the last 24 hours, he had a big climate crisis launch with John Kerry talking. So the left is not coming away empty-handed so far, but history suggests it will only be a matter of time before he comes under pressure for not moving quickly enough, for making concessions to Republicans, and so on. And I think, especially the fact that because Democrats now do have the White House and both chambers of Congress, generally what we know is that gives parties the luxury of infighting. When I was previewing the presidential election, and I interviewed Paul Begala, who's an old Democratic strategist, and asked him about these issues. And he said at that point he was genuinely very impressed and pleased with the way the left had rallied around Biden because of the need to defeat Trump. And as he put it, there's nothing that unites the people of Earth so much as an external threat from Mars. And I think they did unite because of that threat from Mars in the shape of Trump. Now that's over, sure, you'll see some of the old wounds reopen.
Just quickly.
Now that Trump is gone, sorry, Gareth, I just want to ask. So now that Trump is gone, and we don't get this beamed out to us as much as before when Trump was there, but the far right, has it tempered, or have they just been driven underground and they're probably rebuilding, and they're going to spend the next 4 years kind of swelling their ranks and come back stronger?
Sadly, I fear more the latter. Yes, and I'm looking into a bit of that this week. You have still a lot of activity. White supremacist far right groups like the Proud Boys. You see it on the streets, you see it online, but also there's a danger, an apparent likelihood that this is actually becoming quite mainstream in the Republican Party. I mean, literally the last few hours, I was interviewing an old Republican strategist about how some of the state Republican parties are now just quite brazenly embracing this white nationalist rhetoric and the QAnon conspiracy theory. You have some members of Congress, like a new member from Georgia, Marjorie Greene Taylor, spouting some of the stuff. We still need more investigation. Were some members of Congress even implicated in the riot on the 6th of January? Did they show some of the rioters how to get around Congress and so on? Does appear to be a danger that in opposition, the Republican Party might veer even more extremely to the right and become a haven for those groups. Ocasio-Cortez was on the TV just last few hours arguing, actually, their loyalty, their devotion is no longer to Donald Trump. It's actually to white nationalism and far right extremism. And
whereas
I mean, social media. Sorry,
here's the problem. I mean, social media has kind of excised much of this, and they've done their best to keep Donald Trump off of social media. So where are we going to, because we've now banned all these people, where are we going to watch them? Where are we going to keep an eye? And this is what Pumi's saying that I'm also equally concerned about, is that you can't have censorship, and it is censorship, when you force points of view that don't fit into the mainstream off of social media. And it's within the rights of those companies. So I'm by no means saying that they have to be made to let these people sprout their nonsense or their conspiracy theories, or at worst their hatred. But if we don't allow them a place to vent, how will we know what they're doing and what they're thinking? And then we'll be surprised again in a few years' time, or perhaps even sooner, I hope not, when another insurrection takes place, or when half of the American population decides to vote for someone even more distasteful than Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think those were great points. And I was just about to say, similarly, that you are seeing Facebook and Twitter ban not only Trump, but some of those groups. But that does then beg the question, where are they going? There seem to be some encrypted apps that some of them use, and sites such as Gab and so on. And it does potentially drive them underground. It does make the hatred fester even more.
And these people, they're also going to feel even more justified in their anger and their being removed from the public square when they see that, it's turning into something of a we've got to get these guys now. And there's this major white nationalist movement, which we don't see as a major thing. I mean, it's not a big force in America. I think that perhaps ideologically, the right wing in America was already spent and out of new ideas some 20, 30 years ago. These guys who are resurgent now are more just angry, disenfranchised, and miserable outsiders more than they are ideologues. Don't you agree?
Well, I don't agree that there are not many white nationalists around. These groups appear to be thriving, and we've seen that in protests and violence, and we've seen it in the statistics of a rising number of rape attacks.
There isn't a lot of evidence for this. It's the same as people who claim that Biden's a communist. I mean, it's the same kind of hysteria from the other side. These are extremes, right?
They're certainly extremists. But I mean, if you take the 6th of January riots at the Capitol, for example, they were not just a random bunch of people only waving Trump flags or just going crazy for the sake of it. Many of them did have far-right iconography. They were waving the Confederate flag.
David, you hear this from the right when they talk about Antifa. They're doing the same thing as you're doing now, and we know that these are small minorities of extremely aggressive and very motivated people, but they're by no means an indication of some national groundswell on either side.
Well, Donald Trump got 74 million votes, despite being widely regarded as a white nationalist in the White House.
I don't think he was widely regarded as a white nationalist. He was regarded that way by the leftist media and largely by the political party machine of the Democratic Party, which tried to label him as such. There's no evidence in any of his policy that he ever was a white nationalist at any level. You could certainly say some of his comments were off color, but there have been presidents who were out and out racists who occupied the White House who've been given the kid glove treatment, like Johnson, for example.
Well, some of the policies I talked about earlier, the border wall, the Muslim travel ban, and
travel ban Biden's put in. You could argue that terrorism.
Gareth. The travel ban that Biden has put in. Gareth, hold on. The travel ban that Biden has put in is not just an African travel ban. The UK is on that list. Ireland is on that list. He has specifically identified places that have got a resurgence and a different strain of the coronavirus from what they have. And that makes sense to me, right? Is if you can isolate a new strain from coming into your country, you're trying to, and it's based on the virus. It's not based on race or on a religious ideology. That is unacceptable with what Trump was. And that's what Trump was about. Trump and his dog whistles to the far right in all of his press in his press conferences and with his tweets, always dog whistling to the far right. He may not have come out to say I am a white nationalist, but his performance and what he does and what he says.
I say that's cosmetic. I say that all of that is a say thing instead of a do thing. To me, it's much more indicative of how you feel about Muslims when you drone bomb them like all the previous administrations before Donald Trump did into the dust and ground than if you just instate a Muslim travel ban on the countries that have the most terrorists coming into your country. That would seem to me to be something also very rational, to ban Somalia, for example, which is in the only thing that you could find that's ties together a Somalia and a Syria is the fact that there happen to be a lot of Muslims in both countries. Otherwise, you're looking for a reason to put someone into a category. I don't believe that Barack Obama was necessarily nicer to the Muslim world than Donald Trump was. You could argue exactly the opposite based on deaths.
Let me just give you 3 quick examples, though, and I think sometimes words are actions, and they're painfully difficult to separate. So remember Charlottesville and the white nationalists marching there and chanting "Jews will not replace us," and Trump drawing a moral equivalence between them and the civil rights protesters who were there. Remember Trump's comments about the Squad. You mentioned Ilhan Omar and others earlier about they should go back to their own countries, even though they were U.S. citizens. Now, you may say those are only words, but actually they have real world consequences, and people act on those words. And I myself remember going to a Trump rally with a 99% white crowd, and we were in Minnesota, and Trump ranting on about the Somali community there, and
I'm sorry,
expressing hostility to them, and whipping up the crowd. I mean, I was hearing echoes of demagogues of the past for sure.
The 2 examples you guys chose, were the border wall, and there are border walls all over the world. There are border walls in parts of Europe, which is supposedly open for you to travel through. I was there just 2 years ago, and I marveled at the fact that you could cross some borders and others you couldn't with ease. There are border walls in places where people have no problems with each other. It's about national sovereignty. So I don't know that that's necessarily something you could tie to race. And as for the Muslim countries, there were countries on that list that weren't Muslim, and were by far and away not considered Muslim countries. But it's useful to do these things in politics, but we don't like to look at them when the beam is in our eye. And I'm just saying we need a little bit of objectivity if we're to take this presidency seriously. And we've been told over the last 4 years not to take the presidency seriously. We've done our own damage in the media. I'm saying we have a responsibility to this. I just want to ask you, David, because we only have you for a little while longer, and you have had lots of experience in South Africa. What are you still seeing as the main stories coming out of South Africa that people in America or internationally might be interested in? What are the big stories?
The first thing to say is I must say I was shocked, and I still am shocked about how the US is very insular. Like sadly, South Africa very rarely figures in internet, and very few countries do. And when Robert Mugabe died, okay, that got a bit of coverage from Zimbabwe, but otherwise, Africa generally doesn't feature much. I think when South Africa is covered, there are some strands on sport and cultural life and things happening, but obviously politically, what people still just want to know is how is democracy surviving or otherwise? How is what's the latest on inequality? Is it being reduced? I suppose some have been interested by parallels between America and South Africa in terms of these stress tests for democracy. It was during the Trump era, of course. I don't think certainly Trump never visited Africa, and I don't think that the South African president ever came to the White House. I think the Nigerian president did. South Africa was way off the Trump White House radar. And
I think it took him forever even to appoint our ambassador. And for
exactly.
I mean, I don't think we were on top of their list of priorities then. We may have a slightly kinder treatment under the Biden regime. But listen, David, it's always good to catch up with you. I know that we spent a lot of our time focused on the U.S. this morning, and I know you have experience and you have an opinion to bring to bear on so many other things. So I'd love to have you back one day, and we decide that we'll leave the American stuff out and talk about all the other things that I know you care about and are interested in. But thank you very much. It's a great pity you're not here to be at all these press conferences that I used to see you at in South Africa, and giving our politicians a hard time, because God knows they need it. And best of luck for the next 4 years. I'm sure that you will be one of the ones who won't be giving Joe Biden an easy run. And I'm sure that there'll be lots more to talk about the next time we see you.
Thanks very much.
I really appreciate you waking up, or rather not going to sleep tonight, so that you could be a part of the show this morning too.
No problem.
The clock is at the opposite end for you as it is for us.
Yes.
Thank you so much,
right.
David. David
All
Smith.
Thanks.
Thank you. Smith, the Guardian Washington, D.C. bureau chief, who joins us this morning on the Burning Platform. And Pumi Mashiko, as ever, my co-host for the Burning Platform this morning, brought to you by Nando's. Make sure you don't miss it. If you did miss anything, you can get the podcast, which is available on cliffcentral.com.